And there it is. And at the end of the presentation, there will be plenty of time for questions. And you can unmute your phone for questions and call in to ask them, or you can go into the chat box to ask a question. Just be sure to hit the prompt to broadcast to all if you go into the chat. So just a little background, Colorado Rural Health Center and Locum Leaders have worked together to educate each other on our business practices in regards to the rural and underserved clinic landscape. And we've learned so much valuable information about the value of hiring locums from Joe and Dr. Harrington over at Locum Leaders. So again, I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity for these folks to talk to you all a little bit more about locums. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Harrington to start the presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. Joe and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to present to this group. We've been looking forward to this for a while and hope that you guys get some valuable information out of this. When Joe and I first started talking about this presentation, we talked about kind of an agenda for the program, and I think probably everybody would be best served if we talk a little bit about locum tenens firms in general, appropriate use of locums, what to expect from reputable locums firms, and then how best to interface with locums firms and in order to achieve maximum value for you as a client of locum tenens firms. And so that's sort of the overall agenda of our talk today, and we'll sort of progress through that. As Sarah said, because this is a webinar, it's a little bit difficult to take questions sort of mid-presentation. So what we'd like to do is just have you hold or jot down any questions, and be happy to take some time at the end to answer any and all of those questions that come up during the presentation. And if need to, we can back up to certain slides and those kind of things. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Just a little bit about my background so you understand my perspective on this. I've not always been involved with locums, and in fact, for most of my career, I was on the other side in a seat close to yours as a utilizer of locums. I now serve as the Chief Medical Officer for Locum Leaders. We're based here in Atlanta. We're a nationwide staffing firm that predominantly places locum tenens. We have a very small component of a permanent placement business, but that's not obviously our core business. We are focused on hospital medicine, but over the last 2 years have diversified a little bit and now also provide services in emergency medicine, psychiatry, surgery, which includes orthopedics and OBGYN, and primary care. My career has been predominantly in hospital medicine, although I started out as a primary care physician. I trained in family medicine, spent a couple of years in the Air Force, and then joined a private practice with a friend of mine from residency for a few years before embarking on starting my first hospitalist program in Central North Carolina. I've been doing hospital medicine for about 12 years now. I serve on the board of directors for the Society of Hospital Medicine, which is our specialty society. And in my previous life, I was the Vice President of Medical Affairs for a national hospitalist management group that at our peak had about 42 practices in 20 states. And those practices range in size from 2 physicians in very rural locations up to 30-plus physicians at some of the academic medical centers that we worked in. So all in all, I have about almost 20 years of experience in primary care. I've done a lot of emergency medicine both in the Air Force and after the Air Force as a moonlighter, and then my predominant career in hospital medicine. When I was with the National Hospitalist Management Group, we were a very large utilizer of locums, and so I actually got involved in the locum tenens industry because of some of my frustrations with interfacing with locum tenens firms. And so I can certainly relate to any of those of you out there who have had physicians that maybe weren't up to the quality that you expected, or have had experience with locum tenens firms that did not provide the level of customer service that you may have been expecting when you contracted with them. And I can certainly identify with that. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and maybe what are the things that you can not just ask for, but demand from a reputable locums firm as you evaluate your current vendors and move forward. So the first question is, in my mind, is do you really need locum tenens physicians? And I think that's a very individual question. And if you ask your CFO, they're probably going to tell you no. We used to call them CF no's. And so, I think it's something that you have to look at on a facility by facility basis. And I think the tough questions that you need to ask are probably some of the following. Number one is, do you have an adequate primary care base? When you look at your primary care base, do you find that your appointment wait times for things like routine physicals and well child checks and routine well woman exams and those kind of things are significant? And when I say significant, more than 30 to 60 days. And if so, then you probably have a primary care need and could benefit from looking at expanding those services on a primary care level. Do you transfer cases out of your current facility because of lack of coverage? And the critical specialties that we sort of look at when we make these decisions are things that most communities should have access to: general surgery, orthopedic surgery, emergency medicine, and hospital medicine as a way to cover your inpatient census. And if you're lacking in some of those specialties, even periodic coverage, particularly in general surgery and orthopedic surgery, may be beneficial to you in order to be able to retain some of those more elective cases and keep those patients in their own community where they can get their health care. You need to obviously look at planned absences. The physician population in the United States is aging rapidly, and a lot of people approaching retirement, probably some in your community. You need to look at things like planned maternity leaves, any other kind of planned absence that might be coming up, and think about filling the gap during those planned absences with locum tenens physicians. And then obviously unplanned absences, which makes it a little bit difficult and more stressful on everybody, but doctors get sick too, and unfortunately they have to have surgery or they have to have time off. Are there people in the community that can pick up the slack when those kind of things happen, or do you need to kind of build some bench strength in terms of relationships with locum tenens vendors that might be able to help get you through some of those unplanned absences? In terms of the appropriate use of locums, there's probably a list as long as my arm in terms of reasons people do use locums, but I think you probably ought to focus on 4 big ones that sort of come to mind when I think about this. Certainly, peak seasons and volume surges are apparent in most of our communities and probably coincide with certain things. If you're in a vacation destination, that's obviously going to play into your thoughts about physician coverage. The winter respiratory season for almost all of us probably is a time when we start to see a lot of volume surge on our inpatient units coming in the critical care units and on the hospitalist services. We had a phone call with one of our clients the other day who was in Oregon, and as with a lot of the western states having problems with wildfires right now, and experience a heavier than normal respiratory season right now just because of some of the ash and smoke in the air. So those are some of the unplanned volume surges that might be there that you might need to think about adding physician coverage in order to accommodate. I would also suggest you look at service lines that might boost your facility's revenue. We mentioned earlier orthopedic surgery and general surgery, sometimes urology. Those are probably the big ones that really can provide some additional revenue at year end for your facility. And you ought to think about scheduling some of those elective cases if you have the capability to do so within your facility and bringing in people part-time to be able to provide that service. We mentioned covering for scheduled or unscheduled absences. That's kind of a no-brainer. The other thing that I would mention and that I think is very important is to use locum tenens as kind of a bridge as you look to hire full-time people in your recruitment process. one of the things that I see on a regular basis, and I do some consulting work, particularly in hospital medicine, where we go into an understaffed program, and they've been understaffed for 3 or 4 years, and they're having difficulty recruiting. And it's apparent to me that when you bring potential recruits into a hospital medicine program or even a primary care practice, and the first thing they see are physicians with their white coats unbuttoned and their stethoscopes flying around behind their necks, and they're running around like chickens without heads, it's going to be hard to sell a recruit on that kind of an environment. The first step in making your facility or your practice more recruitable is to really right-size the staffing so that workloads are manageable, physicians are happy, patients are satisfied, and it presents well to those people that you bring in for recruiting visits. I can't emphasize enough the importance of making sure that your staffing is right-sized to make your program or your facility much more recruitable. And I think that's one of probably the underused values of locum tenens positions. So what can you expect from a reputable locums firm? You know, I came to locum tenens because of some of the experiences that I had with previous locums firms that we worked with that were less than satisfactory. And so we look at locum tenens a little bit differently from the client perspective. And I think that if you are working with a reputable locum tenens firm, they should spend time with you understanding the nuances of the assignment that you're asking them to help recruit for. Are there particular skills those physicians need to have in order to be successful in this environment? Are there particular communication strategies, whether that's language barriers or whatever, that you really need to look for in the physician pool that you're fishing from? And I think that's important that the locum tenens firm understands those nuances in order to go out and recruit the right kind of people. You may have already developed practice descriptions for each of those positions that you're trying to fill. Those are routinely very helpful to us, but I will tell you that we routinely pick up those practice descriptions and have 4 or 5 or 6 more questions that we need answered on a pretty regular basis in order to be able to present you with qualified candidates and their CVs. The other thing I think you ought to really ask about as you evaluate your vendors is their candidate sourcing and their vetting process. Who within that organization determines the appropriateness of the candidate? And my experience is that most locum tenens firms, that responsibility lays with the recruiter. I'm not sure that's always adequate. It depends upon the training level of the recruiter, the level of experience that they have, but they should have other resources to be able to vet candidates that may be people you don't want to eliminate from consideration for whatever reason, and may have explanations for things in their past, whether it's malpractice or NPDB issues. I will tell you, I come across physicians all the time who have NPDB reports on them, and when you do a deeper dive into that, it's not always the physician's fault, and the system by which the NPDB takes reports and amends reports and deletes reports is very, very onerous to physicians. And unfortunately, once that report is in there, for whatever reason, it's very difficult to be able to make appropriate changes to that really presents the true facts of the situation. And I've come across, just in the last 6 months, probably 3 physicians who have had NPDB reports that, when you do the deeper dive, really were no fault of their own and had a report filed that shouldn't have been filed in the beginning. And so it's unfortunate that those physicians are labeled, and they shouldn't be eliminated from consideration for certain assignments based on that, but the firm should have a process by which somebody vets those candidates a little bit more deeply. You should also expect that firms practice full disclosure on any issues. You know, we live in a litigious society, and unfortunately, people who have 10 to 15 years of experience in whatever specialty are almost all going to have a significant malpractice history. Now, again, you need somebody with a trained eye who's going to look at that and say, hey, listen, this one settled for $500,000. That's a significant red flag. We need to be careful about this physician. But if somebody has a $25,000 settlement or a $50,000 settlement, the malpractice insurance companies nowadays will routinely pay those amounts to avoid going to court because their costs going to trial far exceed those numbers. And a settlement is not always an admission of guilt. In fact, rarely is an admission of guilt on the part of the physician. So again, those firms have to have a process by which somebody does a little bit deeper dive on malpractice issues and vets those candidates appropriately, and fully discloses that to you upon presentation of those candidates. And that's what I mean by the full disclosure piece. So when you get a CV from a reputable firm, they should present that candidate and say, he has some malpractice history. We've vetted this candidate. We feel like he's still a strong candidate, and here are his malpractice issues or her malpractice issues in the past. And they should present that with full disclosure so that you folks, as you evaluate these candidates, either on paper or by phone interviews, have that information at hand, and it doesn't come to light later on down the road through the credentialing process. It never looks good when the medical staff office is the first to discover those kind of issues, and it makes it very difficult for any firm to get candidates through credentialing when you're discovering issues as the credentialing process unfolds. Reputable firms should also assist you with credentialing, both on the hospital or practice side and also with payer credentialing. You obviously pay a premium for these physician services. Part of what you pay for is the back office staff to be able to streamline gathering of their support documents, all of those kind of things that go into the credentialing process. What we can't do, what reputable firms unfortunately can't do in most instances, is provide primary source verification. And your medical staff office in most instances is going to have to do that on their own, which is a fairly labor-intensive process. But we can help with all of the other administrative duties in terms of gathering their support documents, filling out applications, those kind of things. And then lastly, I think that reputable firms should also assist in licensing candidates for hard-to-fill assignments. If you give us enough lead time, we should be able to find people who can help pending a state license. And as you all know, state licensure is a state-by-state time frame, and certainly probably not something that we could do with a lot of those unplanned absence needs, but certainly can do when you look to build the bench strength to help with things like planned absences and other service lines that you may want to have periodic coverage for, those kind of things. So reputable firms should also assist in the licensing process for those hard-to-fill assignments. They should also help you manage physicians. One of my biggest frustrations as a utilizer of locums in the past was inevitably we had a problem with a physician, albeit minor to start with, and I would reach out to the locums company and find that it was very difficult to get somebody with the credibility with the physician to help me manage them through whatever the issue that I was having with that physician was. Invariably, locums firms contract on a part-time basis with semi-retired or aging physicians to serve as their quote-unquote medical directors, but they may or may not have expertise in the area of the physician that you are working with, and they may or may not have availability to be able to respond in a timely fashion to help with these issues. I found that I ended up solving most of these issues before I got a call back from anybody on the locum side that was in a medical leadership position. And as we probably all recognize out there, physicians are a difficult bunch of people to manage, and they respond much better to constructive feedback from other physicians rather than recruiters, sales managers, whoever the other administrative people are who are involved in this loop. So I think reputable locums firms have the onus on them to help you manage those positions through whatever issues pop up. There is a national organization called NALTO, which is the National Association of Locum Tenens Organizations, and I think reputable firms should be a member of NALTO. And what NALTO does is provide some ethics around locum tenens, which historically has not been the most ethical industry, and provides a very well-described process for dispute resolution between locum tenens firms. You all are inundated on a regular basis with CVs from multiple locum tenens firms, and occasionally you get into the sort of war between firms who say, I presented this candidate on such and such a date, you presented them on this such and such a date. Well, NALTO has very well described rules and regulations about who owns that candidate based upon time of submission and whether or not they had the candidate's permission to submit and all of those kind of things. Those are things that you should step away from and not be involved in, and the locums company should work out themselves based on NALTO rules and regulations. And so you need to relieve yourself of those responsibilities in terms of who owns the candidate and ask the locum tenens firms to work that out amongst themselves based on NALTO rules. I also think that reputable locums firms, ones that want your business and appreciate you as a client, should follow your process. They shouldn't try to cubbyhole your process into their process in terms of submission, credentialing, presentation, those kind of things. They should work with you, understand your process, and follow your process, and make their process work within your process. And lastly, they should be a partner to you. I think that they should look at your business, your facility, your practice as an opportunity to place high-quality physicians that will provide good quality care at the bedside. Your mission for whatever organization you work for probably revolves around the best possible quality of care that you can deliver to your patients. Your partners should look at your mission in the same fashion and deliver service based on that. So I think that's important in terms of the wills for reputable locums firms. What should they not do? Well, you know, we mentioned that locums has not been the most ethical industry in the past, and you know, there are some firms out there that get a little creative when it comes to pricing strategies and those kind of things. And so I will tell you that my firm belief is that they should not unbundle or mark up malpractice costs. They should pass those costs through to you, whatever they may be, and they should be fairly transparent with you about what their malpractice costs are. They should not mark up travel costs, and there are a few firms out there that do that. They should, again, be very transparent upon what those travel costs are and not make a premium on booking travel for those physicians. They should not charge deposits unless you work for an organization that has a bad credit history. And that's easily identifiable through multiple financial avenues. But for the most part, in healthcare, they should not charge you a deposit up front in order to work with you and place locums physicians with you. So that, I guess, brings us to the next question, and that is, how can you as a organization or a facility that potentially might need locums interface with locums firms to maximize your value? We mentioned earlier, I think this is a joint partnership, and you should work with the locums company to provide a very complete and accurate assignment description. It should include skills and procedures that are required, any language or communication issues that might be present there. You should talk about credentialing issues. Do you know that there's a certain type of physician or a certain characteristic of physicians that you've had trouble with your medical staff office in the past getting credentialed? Do they have to have certain training requirements, like being board certified or board eligible in their specialty, or do they have to be fellowship trained, et cetera? Those are things that we would all need to know. In addition to the basics of the assignment, things like volume of patients, hours, call duties, specialty support that might be available for those physicians in your hospital. All of those kind of things go into generating a complete assignment description. We as locums firms need you to understand that unfortunately locums positions have a very limited to no shelf life. And when I say that, I mean these are people who are making fairly quick decisions. They are relying on their own ability to book their schedule 60 to 90 days out, and a lot of times will take more secure work earlier on to secure their income over that period of time. And so from our perspective, it is very difficult for us to present a physician and ask them to wait for 2 weeks while somebody looks at their CV, evaluates them on paper, maybe does a phone interview, and 2 weeks later might confirm them and ask to start the credentialing process. For the most part, these physicians are going to be gone in that 2-week period. We work very quickly. The physicians we work with make decisions very quickly. And so we need, from our partners in this business, fast turnaround times on things like name clears and acceptances. We will do everything we can as a good partner to facilitate you having whatever contact you need with the physician in order to make that decision. But those decisions have to be made fairly quickly. Otherwise, they're not going to be around when the decision is made. This will allow you to feel assured that you can accept and lock down quality positions, because I'll tell you, the first ones to go are the people that are highly in demand, and those are the high-quality positions. So, if you have an urgent need and you get presented several positions that look like they're high quality, you need to step on that process and make sure that you have a team in place, whoever that may be, your chairman of credentialing, the chairman of that department, your chief of staff, that they're on board with making fast turnarounds on these candidates. It's very important. I think you should also interview candidates by phone. And it's very difficult for us and for you financially to do on-site interviews with candidates. And so I think the right structured phone interview can give you a lot of information that you cannot get from looking at a candidate on paper. And I would suggest, if you don't already have that as part of your process, that you make that part of your process. Again, it needs to happen fairly quickly, but certainly provide some contact with you as a facility or an organization and that candidate so that they can get questions answered, you can get questions answered, and you can get a feel for the physician, their style, their communication skills, etc. And I think you ought to provide honest feedback on anybody that you deny or reject from a locums firm. Personally, I learn more about our clients' needs and wants based on their denials than I do by those who they accept. And so it really helps a locums firm to source and vet higher quality candidates that are more appropriate for the assignment if you would provide honest and frank feedback on the positions that you are not interested in moving forward with. You should have a client manager who manages your account, and you should feel free to communicate with that client manager about any physician issues that come up during that physician's assignment. We routinely get things that pop up with timesheets and travel expenses. Occasionally somebody is slow on their billing and chart completion issues. Luckily, we don't have a lot of behavior issues or productivity issues because we do a pretty good job up front in terms of vetting those assignments and making sure that people go into them with the correct expectations. But the issues that pop up should not be yours alone to manage, and I think that you should feel comfortable and free to communicate with that client manager who then should have resources at their fingertips to be able to get those issues solved for you and with you. You should expect assistance from the locums firms to get to resolution on those issues. You should not have to go it alone. The big issue with locums for most of us and again, having sat in that seat for a long period of time in the past, is costs. And as I mentioned earlier, there are some creative accounting that goes into some of these costs depending on the firm that you work with. But most firms, by and large, will charge you a per-hour rate for the services of those physicians. There are some surgical specialties that charge a rate on a per-day basis, which may or may not include some included work hours, and then they should also have stipulated in the agreement with the locums firm any callback rates that might be involved. Overtime is a big sort of contentious item in agreements. We routinely do not charge overtime. We don't pay time and a half or double time for overtime. We charge the normal hourly rate for any overtime that our physicians would work. We do, however, have holiday pay because most full-time physicians have some sort of, especially those that are paid on a per shift or a per hour basis, have some sort of holiday incentives, and because those holidays are the more difficult to fill blocks of time, and it helps us to be able to source candidates if we can offer a premium for holiday pay. There are obvious travel costs associated with locums physicians. We routinely work with clients who ask us only to present drive-in candidates who may only need mileage at a hotel rather than fly-in candidates. That will be very specific to your particular assignment, and obviously the more restrictive you are on travel costs, the more restricted we are on candidates that we're able to find to help. So please realize that we're certainly, and reputable firms should be willing to work with you on the travel costs, again, not marking them up, but that any restrictions that you have sort of trickle down to restrictions that we have in terms of who we can source and vet for the assignment. And I would encourage all of you, and this is particularly for the C-suite and the chief financial officers of those organizations, to look obviously beyond the sticker price of locum tenens physicians and look more closely at some of the downstream revenue opportunities. If you were to bring in an orthopedic surgeon for even a week a month or a week every other month, that could certainly add to downstream revenue, and I'm sure would far surpass the cost that you would pay that physician depending on the contractual obligations there. So I think you need to have a little broader view of what those costs are and what the return on that investment really would be looking downstream at some of those revenue opportunities. And then I think you ought to, in all of your contracts, look at permanent placement fees. Again, we're not a permanent placement company, but we have probably 2 or 3 permanent conversions a month, and our philosophy on that is that if we place a physician with a client and it turns out to be a good fit for the physician who wants to stay and a good fit for the client who wants to have that physician, then we step back and we've already negotiated our permanent placement fees up front in that agreement. And as soon as that permanent placement fee is paid, then the physician becomes a payroll physician for them. It actually hurts our business to do that because we lose very good physicians on a monthly basis to permanent placement, but we understand that what's right for the physician and what's right for the client is something we should not stand in the way of. And I think that when you look at permanent placement fees, you ought to be very careful about some businesses, some firms out there who specifically make their permanent placement fees cost prohibitive to taking their physicians on a permanent basis. I don't think that's fair to the physician, and I certainly don't think it's fair to you as a client. I think they should be competitive. I think they should reflect the fact that that locum tenens firm loses a good quality physician from their database and from their ability to work with them. And the firm should be compensated fairly for that, but not to an extreme. And I think you ought to look heavily at those and figure out what those competitive permanent placement fees are on a specialty by specialty basis. Malpractice insurance is a question that comes up a lot in our client relationships and our client calls. All firms should provide it. There are basically 2 types of malpractice insurance. There's a claims-made policy where a physician is kind of added to a slot policy. And there's a current malpractice insurance, which is where physicians actually go through underwriting individually. that plays a part in the tail insurance issue, which comes into play only on claims-made policies. Tail insurance must be purchased by either the physician, the locum tenens firm, or the client to avoid any possible exposure if the policy gets canceled, if the locum tenens firm who holds the malpractice insurance contract goes out of business, or if that contract is terminated. It's not required on an occurrence policy because occurrence insurance accrues for tail up front and is part of the premium. And so we're a firm that had made a decision early on never to have the conversation with physicians about tail insurance, and we made an investment and obtained an occurrence policy. All of our physicians go through individual underwriting, and so there's a third-party objective person looking at all of our physicians, making the decision whether or not those physicians are worthy of being placed on our insurance policy and insured through our malpractice broker. That's another level of sourcing and vetting of those candidates that claims-made insurance policies does not provide. So it's something to think about as you look at your firms, what kind of malpractice insurance they carry for their physicians. One question that always comes up with malpractice insurance is, can we pay your hourly rate and discount the malpractice insurance because we can put the physician on our malpractice coverage? And this is particularly apparent in more rural areas, specifically critical access hospitals, where they may have a subsidized insurance plan. Unfortunately for us, we find it very difficult to work in those environments. And the reason we find it difficult to do that is because our malpractice insurance also provides vicarious coverage for us as an organization against any possible non-medically related claims, things like sexual harassment, criminal behavior, those kind of things that we obviously need to protect ourselves from. And if we put a physician on a hospital malpractice insurance plan, we lose that vicarious coverage, and it makes it very difficult for us to operate in that environment. So I say that because I hope that those of you who are looking for physicians to be placed on your own hospital's insurance policy understand our position on that. It's not that we don't want to work with you, it's that we leave ourselves open to a significant exposure if those physicians are not on our malpractice policy. And we would basically have to double pay then. We'd have to pay our malpractice, and then we'd add them to yours, and it just doesn't work well for us to do it that way. So how can you recoup some of those premiums that you pay for locum tenens physicians? We'll talk a little bit about the billing issues and process around locum tenens physicians. And so the first question that comes up is, how long can I use a locums? And the answer really is as long as you need one. But the real question is how long can you bill for a locum physician services? And so if you're going to bill under an absent physician's NPI number, then you're allowed to bill for 60 continuous days. The absent provider must come back for at least one day, and then you could have another 60 continuous days that you're allowed to bill. The clock resets at that point. The easier way to do this is to bill under the locum physician's own NPI number, and you need to enroll the physician with CMS, either with an 855I, which is the initial form, or an 855R, which is the reassignment of benefits form, in order to do that. You would add them to your group, and then you would have the physician enrolled under their own NPI number and can bill under that physician's NPI number indefinitely. So if you have somebody that's going to come back and routinely be part of your facility, your organization, or your practice, we would suggest enrolling them on their own using those 855 forms, and I have a slide with some links to those forms, but if you go to CMS website and search under 855I or 855R, you can easily find those forms. They're simple forms to complete. Again, the locums firm should help you with that and be knowledgeable about this process. And again, once you complete that reassignment of benefits, you can bill as long as necessary for that physician to continue to work in your organization. If you use the absent physician's NPI, you have to use a modifier. And this is not my area of expertise, but I think the modifier is a Q6 modifier after each CPT code that you bill for. And again, there's that 60 continuous day restriction on billing for that. So please be careful of that if you are intending to bill under an absent physician's NPI number. If you have a physician who leaves your group, you can still use the absent provider's NPI for billing purposes for up to 60 days from his or her departure date. And again, there's a citation in this slide in terms of the guidelines, the CMS Carriers Manual guidelines that cover this issue. So if you have somebody that leaves, you are able to use their absent NPI number for up to 60 days. There really shouldn't be a change in payment using any of those modifiers to your organization from CMS. And so the timeline really should mirror your routine claims timeline. And here's the slide I mentioned earlier for the 855I and the 855R forms. We can make that available. I'm sure Sarah can send that out to you all if you need those particular websites to get those forms. The other issue that comes up a lot is the recommending course of action for commercial payers. You know, Medicare and Medicaid are one thing, but certainly you have other commercial payers in your area that are probably substantial in your area. What we usually recommend, depending on how long you think you're going to need the locums physician and how often you may need them, is that you look at your individual payer mix, determine what your top commercial payers are, and then pick those payers that comprise 60 to 80% of the non-Medicare or Medicaid payer mix, and enroll the providers with those payers. You should look at that based on your percent of billings and the ease of enrollment, because every payer has a different process in terms of enrolling the physicians with them. Some are much more cumbersome than others. Some require only brief demographic data, and some will refuse to pay any locums claims unless they're completely fully enrolled with the payer. So you need to be knowledgeable about that payer enrollment process. And again, the locums firms should be willing to help you with that payer enrollment process. The reputable locums firms should be willing to do that. So in summary, and then I'll be glad to take some questions, I think you as recruiters and facility managers and practice managers really ought to take a good hard look at your vendors. Evaluate them based on some of the things that we've put forward here today. I think you should demand quality, not just quality physicians, but quality customer service, quality assistance with credentialing, both on the hospital and the payer side. And I think you should look to find vendors who will partner with you, adhere to your process, and help you source and vet candidates appropriately. And then I really think you ought to take a good hard look at your billing processes for locum physician services to be able to recoup the premiums that you pay for these physicians and save yourself some money over the long run. So with that, I will turn it back to Sarah and be happy to answer any questions that might come up.
Thanks so much, Bob. Just as far as questions, if I'm going to unmute the phone.
The conference has been unmuted.
If you don't have a question, just be sure to keep your own phones muted, and go ahead and type into the chat box also if you'd like.
Hey, Dr. Arrington, this is Ken LeBlanc with Centura. How are you?
Hi, Ken. I'm doing well, thanks.
Not that I necessarily have any questions, more of just some comments. As you know, here at Centura, we do utilize a fairly significant amount of locum tenens, in which I do manage. I would just want to add on to a couple of things that you had stated on, an emphasis on the rapport with the client manager. We out here in the facilities and help manage all the recruiting. You hit it right on the head. You know, we get, I'll use the word bombarded. We get hit pretty hard by many agencies every single day at all ways. And there are some very, very good agencies out there, very reputable agencies, some maybe not so much. But I think where it really stems to the validity of everything has to be with that client manager. The rapport that is being built with that individual is so vital. I think that helps ease a lot of those situations that you addressed. Because of the rapport that is built with that client manager. They get to know, a lot of your facilities, what your really needs are, and whether or not you really even need a locum tenens in that position. We all know that there are going to be situations that come up. It's going to happen. Where it comes down to is how are those situations handled. So having a reputable locum tenens agency and a reputable client manager to help services is so vital in the timing and the efficiency of the relationship that is built there.
Yeah, Ken, that's very well said. I think I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the role of that client manager really should be to have their finger on the pulse of their client facility and be able to pull in the resources that they need to get to resolution on any issues that pop up, whether they be financial, physician-related, whatever it happens to be. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think that client manager plays a key role in our business as well. Other questions out there?
I have a quick question. This is Sarah. In regards to rural providers that you all work with, how do you, as locum leaders, screen providers for a best fit for a rural or underserved job, or how would you expect other locums firms to do so?
That's a great question, Sarah. I think for us, every client is very different, and part of our process is to get that very complete assignment description up front. The other thing, because we have a lot of experience working with some more rural facilities, is that there's an understanding in our organization, especially with our recruiters, because we've provided them some training on this, that in more rural facilities, you really are looking for physicians who are able to be more independent and self-sufficient. There tends to be a lack of the sort of broad safety net that some larger, more urban, more academic medical centers provide in terms of subspecialty support, consultative support, those kind of things. And so really when we look at rural assignments, we look for people who are experienced, independent, self-sufficient, and are comfortable in an environment where they don't have all of those necessary tools right at their fingertips like they would if they were here at Atlanta Medical Center or at one of the Metro Denver hospitals. I think that's a personality type in addition to a skill set that seems to function well in those environments more than anything else.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Dr. Arrington, this is Ken LeBlanc again. Are you seeing more of a trend of physicians coming out of residency and fellowship that want to do more locums?
We are seeing, yes, to answer your question, yes, I think we are. I think that's probably a specialty by specialty answer. In hospital medicine, the answer is yes. In primary care, maybe not so much. In some of the surgical specialties, I think coming right out of residency or fellowship, those people are probably looking to land a more secure job. I think, in hospital medicine, there are increasing numbers of physicians who have either learned from others that have gone before them or learned from their first or second job out of residency that not all hospitalist programs are managed equally or well. And there are some places where physicians feel like they are in a high-risk environment. And so locums affords them the opportunity to be able to sort of try it on for size before they sign a full-time contract. And I think there is a movement afoot, specifically in hospital medicine, for people to either sign shorter full-time contracts or potentially work on a locum to perm basis in order to evaluate a practice or a facility before they sign on full-time. In some of the other specialties, it's more difficult for me to say that. I think if you're an orthopedic surgeon and you finish your residency or fellowship, you're probably looking to join a practice at that point and not necessarily do locum tenens. Same with neurosurgery, urology, some of the surgical specialties. So I don't think it's so much a truism there as it would be in maybe some of the more transient specialties like hospital medicine, emergency medicine, those kind of fields.
Okay. And on another question is, obviously, I think you have a little bit of bias to here, being prior military. For the rural community, do you see, and what's your opinion about military physicians working and doing a lot of rural assignments or just doing a lot of locum tenens?
Great question, and I would tell you that I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of times it's more of a personality type in conjunction with a skill set that makes people successful in those environments. For some reason, military physicians tend to be more of that kind of personality and have that kind of skill set. They are used to working in less than optimal conditions in places that don't necessarily have all of the resources that may be needed, and therefore have to either improvise or become creative in terms of finding solutions. We work specifically with one company who contracts with critical access hospitals to provide both emergency medicine on a very low volume ER basis and also hospital medicine services with the same physician. And they recruit heavily from the military ranks to be able to find those type of physicians who can, quote unquote, be the jack of all trades. And so I think you're right. I think that's a very rich, very fertile ground for recruitment for rural hospitals because you will find more than your average number of physicians who have that skill set and personality type.
I agree. Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, well with that, I want to thank our audience for taking the time out of your day to listen in on the webinar and give a very special thanks to Dr. Harrington for volunteering his expertise and experience in the world of locums recruiting. Just a quick announcement, I want to let everyone know that Joe Winnings, who's the Vice President over of Business and Development at Locum Leaders, will be speaking at the Colorado Rural Health Center's annual conference this October. And if anyone is interested in registering for the conference, or if you'd like more information on hiring a locums or a permanent provider, I will send out contact information following this presentation. The information will also include a real brief survey I would ask you to fill out, and I'm happy to send the webinar out to anyone who is on the call as well. With that, if there are no more questions, this will conclude the webinar.
Thanks for having us, Sarah. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.